Hey everybody, this is OmisHut22 for PokerCoachO.com. Stay tuned for updates. Check out the free webinars by lots of people. Let's get into the action. Let's go. This is now we're at 100. We're testing out the waters at 100 NL. Let's hope we don't just get absolutely massacred. These guys are soul crushers. We need to watch out. One of the biggest leaks that I've noticed at these stakes is that people just do not bluff. Like people just do not bluff whatsoever on like rivers. And I don't know, like bluffing is just part of the way that you end up getting paid off with your value. Like if people are making large exploitative folds when you have good hands, it's really, really, really disastrous for the EV of your overall strategy, obviously. Like it's disgustingly bad if people are able to overfold against you. But for some reason, you have people that are playing these games for many, many years that still, this is just a pure squeeze for me, this particular combo. Just looking at sizing, I think this is the correct sizing. Yeah, I mean, you have people that have been playing these games for just years and they still don't give a fuck on this particular texture. So I'm not even squeezing nines, I'm squeezing tens plus, whereas his range is incredibly concentrated toward these exact sort of pocket pairs where it should be. I am playing a strategy where I'm going to check range. However, on turns, I am going to probably turn up the aggression quite a bit in general and not play so passively because I'm basically assuming that he's going to. Now, the diamond, he actually ends up giving up a number of diamonds, so. But it doesn't really matter. This guy's actually a 50, 30 something VPIP whale. He cannot fold a hand. We just played a hand against him very recently where he just called the absolutely most ridiculous hand in the world versus like a like 2/3 bet or something. I'm not going to bluff at all against him. Now I was just talking about not bluffing, but it's very dependent on the opposition that you're playing against. Now we end up having a straight. He definitely has some 10x, generally the Broadway region, which this recreational player will play just like this. But regardless, I mean, I'm not really interested in doing anything else. I'm just going 2/3, hoping he looks me up with some sort of random A7, blah, blah, blah. He raises the river. I think he just has obviously too many 10x. Not going to work out very well to be bluffing the river in that particular situation. Obviously, in theory, you'd want to make his bluffs, indifferent, there. And you've not really zero EV. I don't know that they'd have. I mean, they wouldn't have any EV to call, right? So, but like fucking, yeah, it's not a thing. The guy's just not bluffing enough. Just fold, call your good stuff. I don't even think I'm having bluffs there just because I think the guy is going to fucking call an absolute shit ton. Like on the four straight, I think he's going to call like almost any pair whatsoever. And while he doesn't get to river with very many pairs because a bunch of 9x, if he had it on the turn, would end up just rando stabbing like queen 9. But the same is true for a fair amount of 10x as well. So. I had some people tell me, "Oh, you're playing too aggressive, whatever." At 100, I'm like, "Well, I am probably playing a touch too aggressive in some areas." Actually, every single time I have a hand, I seem to get paid money because people just don't fold and they don't really understand the situation. They just like tag me as like, "Oh, this guy's crazy," and then they call, which is I don't know, but the thing is, it seems like they like to call in like situations where I'm probably not bluffing all that often, or maybe I'm bluffing correctly, but then their hand is just going to go negative versus my range. So it's yeah. I mean, I think being more aggressive than not aggressive enough is obviously a better strategy at these stakes. Yeah, and it's fun as well. Not to be all like in the ego and trying to smash people up, but I do think it's kind of a reasonable strategy. Here, I'm just going to go a third with range. I'm not going to explain my exact range because I don't want people to necessarily know. Here, we do need to be bluffing the turn with even some hearts. Now, Ace Jack, this particular combo is going to pure check. Now, we will have Ace 5 here, and we will have Ace 10. Even some of the Ace 10 will end up firing, but the Ace of Hearts here, not particularly good. River, we play a bunch of shoves, basically, but we don't even slow play the turn that often. Just given the way that ranges work in this particular situation on the turn, we really don't slow play. We just front door an absolute shit ton of stuff. And yeah, we are going to end up finding our shoves from mostly hands like kings, queens, jacks if we end up finding a check with him, and then obviously the sort of like Broadway region. Like if we can find any kings in our range whatsoever, it's really good because his most frequent calls against an all-in are going to be specifically like ace king. So If we have like king queen here, king jack, this sort of thing, it's going to be very, very, very good to decide to shove. King 10. Obviously, very easy call on the river. No, nothing to say about that spot. We have a flush. We're calling a flush on the river. Now at equilibrium, we're supposed to be basically like checking aces on the turn here because he's supposed to have a bunch of like queen jack of hearts and stuff that have like called the flop. Maybe even like king jack of hearts, king queen of hearts, and then decided to check the turn at some frequency, and then they'll always bluff river. And then when we hold the aces, we obviously unblock those. Whereas when we hold something like kings or queens or jacks, we kind of unblock his ace highs that have to call, which is part of the reason why we're shoving, and we unblock his checks, right? But in reality, if I have aces here, I'm not going to slow play the river. I'm just going to go all in. I don't think people are finding enough bluffs here when they end up being checked too, with various hands like ace 10, ace 10 of spades, blah, blah, blah. I think people are just playing too passively, and when that's the case and they're not going to be bluffing enough, you should just jam all in with your aces. We call it 3.5x. It's kind of big. This hand is just a pure check on the turn. No fancy business going on here. Queen Jack, I am defending 100% of the time against this squeeze, though I am folding. So in terms of my pair region, I basically have like the 4s to 8s. I mean, sorry, 4s to 9s 50% of the time, and then half of the time I'm folding. So my range, I don't have any deuces or 3s. My range ends up being relatively strong here. And we have to be defending this spot with some frequency of check raise. However, I'm going to say that I think my perceived range here is pretty strong, so I'm going to make an exploitative fold. In addition to that, like I think my perceived range is relatively strong, and I think his 3-bet frequency, even though we have a small sample, so I'd say that it's very likely that it's between a 3 and a 9. That's about the confidence that I can give, and that's not even necessarily true, and it's probably closer to the population turn. We just need to barrel this off. I think geometric sizing is like quite appropriate on this turn, given the amount of 7s and 10s that we have more than him. Those 7s is a mixed strategy 3-bet. I don't have those at a pure frequency here, though. Ace 10, ace 7, ace 5. I don't have ace 7, but whatever. I think geometric is the correct sizing. I think we just maximize more against his range. And this hand, obviously, with a heart and with a spade, we don't have very many offsuit broadways. This is just a clear 100% bet, like no matter what. And then obviously following through on any heart, any sort of spade on the river. If we're not bluffing these sort of hands, this guy can literally start folding stuff like ace 2 of diamonds. And if we're allowing him to do that, like, I mean, if he's able to just like say every single time he has a weak ace, he's like, oh, Almost Hot only has 10s. He only has like ace king, ace queen. He's not bluffing enough. Like, what does that mean? Well, obviously we're not making money with our fucking 10s. Like, that's not a good thing. So we need to round out our value region and find some bluffs and force him to call those hands down, basically. Turn, I'm almost always betting this. This queen is obviously incredibly good for us. Now, while he should end up having a number of like Queen X here, like even he should be floating something like King Queen of Hearts on the flop. I think you'll find a number of players like lacking those sort of Queen X bluffs, or sorry, Queen X floats. I don't think they necessarily have enough King Queen of clubs, King Queen of hearts, all that. I'm betting range for a third here. Here with the ace of clubs, I have to continue bluffing very often. I'm not going to RNG it. Just with the ace of clubs, I'm barreling off on the turn. I'm going to go a little bit smaller, so it's closer to geometric, and obviously king of diamonds, I'll end up... I'm just going to bluff basically most rivers. Having the ace of clubs blocks his most frequent ace-jack suiteds, and we basically want him to call down with some weak combos. Like, we're always bluffing this at this point. And he needs to call down with, like, 6s. Like, you kind of want him to call down 6s pretty often here. When he calls 6s, you're not sad. You're like, oh, thank God. Like, I actually end up... having enough value, that sort of thing. So people get into these spots and they're like, oh, fuck, I don't want to bluff. It's like, no, like, if he fucking calls you down, like, it's good. Like, it's not a bad thing. He should be calling you down pretty frequently. And obviously, like, this queen is the nuts for our range. We just bluff anything we can get here with. I mean, I find it very hard to believe that we actually have anything close to enough bluffs, but, like, hopefully he'll decide to look us up anyways. He may start Explo overfolding this river just because it's so incredibly hard to find bluffs. Also, I don't even 3-bet. Yeah, it's hard for me to talk about my exact range, but yeah. Turn, I'm simplifying, and I'm only using one sizing, which is going to be slight overbet. In terms of our bluffs here, we're basically going to have some pocket fours. We're going to, okay, hold on. We're going to open this. Turn, yeah, this hand is going to play as a check. Yeah, in terms of bluffs, we're going to try to duplicate his most frequent, like, ace-x call downs of, like, jack 10, which is going to be relevant. We had some hands like pocket fours, which, obviously, just from MP, it's really, really hard to find enough bluffs. It's just not an easy thing to find enough bluffs. And obviously, the only size here we have this hand is shove. If you're not shoving, you're making a massive, massive, massive error. And there's no way to justify saying, "Oh, well, I'm not making an error. He's folding too much." Well, if this guy's folding too much, it's probably because you're playing a bad strategy, and it's probably because you're not aggressive enough in other areas. And if that's the case, well, then you should really restructure your game. Like, when you see people saying hand histories, oh, how much should I bet here? How much is it going to call? Like, you're approaching it the wrong way. It means you're fucking everything else up when you're playing. Like, if you're not having an all-in range on the river there, then you're just not playing very good poker, basically. Yeah. Obviously, range versus range, the way to maximize your range when it's not quite a nuts versus air spot, but it's like very close, especially when he ends up probably sevens. It's a pure fold for me out of the small blind versus EP. Yeah, I mean, how do you make the most money when you have the nuts and your opponent mostly has bluff catchers? Well, you go all in. It's like incredibly simple. The turn, you wanted to be more GTO, you could have actually like geometrically sized the turn. I was lazy and I just chose a one sizing easy overbet, but it's not a big deal. The King 7 I'm using as a 3-bet occasionally. Actually, this comp, well, it's hard for me to want to talk about exactly what I'm doing pre-flop, but yeah. This is obviously pure fold, folding to a 4-bet. Definitely want to have the correct frequency to fold the 4-bet. If you're not folding the 4-bets enough, you're not really giving your opponents incentive to bluff. You're not giving them incentive to stick in more shit hands against your good hands, blah, blah, blah. You want to play a relatively tough strategy and just put pressure on people and make people have miserable lives. 9-4 is going to fold against 2.5x. I'm not playing any sort of cold calls in the cutoff versus UTG or any of the other positions. Against this cold 4, we're just folding the ace-queen suited. The opener is opening roughly 18%. We're 3-betting about 40% of that, and then this guy to cold 4, it should even be a little bit less than 40%. So, like, we just need to get in there really, really strong. Like, and I think exploitatively, that guy's range is stronger than it actually should be. Or sorry, I think yeah. So like sizing, timing, you'll see some people go to like 18 there pre-flop with just like the nizzles, and then you'll see someone go to like 15 with ace king or like queens. I know that sounds silly, but it's actually a thing. We'll mix check raise here and call, but mostly just calling. We don't have that many hands, and the in-position player limping, while he's a recreational player and he's not really having that much of a hand, I just don't really want to be putting in loads of money. I'm going to go with a block bet on the river. I just don't think I'm getting bluff raised very often. I think occasionally he'll just like spaz call ace 5 or some random hand. When he went for the very small bet on the turn, I didn't think he has as many 10x. He definitely has some 10x for sure, and he'll end up raising me, and I'm going to fold against the majority of raise sizes. But I think it's just higher EV to go with the bet, because I think he'll just have a ton of like ace 3, ace 2, 3, 4, stuff that's going to end up calling. And if I'm going to call a river bet, I might as well just bet regardless if I'm not getting bluff raised at some absurd frequency, assuming he ends up calling as well. And when you end up taking away the option for them to like repolarize, then obviously your hand is no longer a bluff catcher, right? Like, you end up kind of forcing them into that defensive mode, and if they're not deciding to bluff raise you, like, it's quite an interesting thing. Here on the button, it's sort of an interesting spot where the majority of our suited combinations end up being ace of spade, king of spades. Same with him, but it's a spot where we both end up just playing incredibly passively, and we just don't put in like tons of money on this particular mono texture with these two ranges. Even against a range c-bet, maybe on a normal like mono board that isn't like ace king high, you're looking at maybe like a 10% raise frequency, 11%. Maybe on this one you're looking at more like an 8, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but I think that makes intuitive sense to me. I'm not having leads here against 2.5x. Like a lot of people think, oh, our range is really strong here. No, actually, like against 2.5x, it's not that strong. I'm mixing turn. I roll 59. I'm going with the check because I think he is probably playing a relatively decent strategy here. I am going to be probing stuff like ace 9 at probably a 70% frequency, even something like ace 8, and even occasionally some hands like pocket 7s. So it's not like, oh, we're just probing top pair plus, but we're having a good mixing of like, different combinations and just trying to play an overall good probing strategy. Here, when I end up playing the turn, I always decide into my time bank. I never insta call. I never just instant out call. This hand is obviously a pure call on the river. We're just blocking his value. We have a bunch of like call folds here. This does not include. This is not a call fold in this situation. Now you'll find a bunch of people that underbluff the river with great blockers. So Ace King is a very interesting combination to be delay bluffing because what it does is it really counters someone who decides to call something like Ace 7. It really counters someone who decides to call Ace Queen. It counters someone that decides to call Ace 10 and is not aggressive enough and that isn't check raising enough. So like I think kudos to him for finding that sort of a strategy, and I think it works really well against the other players that are basically playing too passively with those kind of draws. I think it's a very intelligent strategy from him. On the river, I think it's a clear check as well, just given that he's beating so many of those kind of combinations. One thing you might want to say on the notes is like, oh, well, I think this guy's maybe delaying too frequently, maybe pushing too many marginal hands. Relatively high EV board for the out of position player here. He has like all the 9s, the queens, the king, queen. I'm 3-betting the majority of the jack 10 suited, even to touch the offsuit versions. We just need to play incredibly defensive here. Obviously, our hand is always a pure call no matter what, so it doesn't really matter. But in terms of range versus range, as far as his sizing, it's not really much of a thing. Generally, he should be using much smaller sizes than this. He can also mix in some larger sizes, but half pot's not really a thing. I am going to be betting this on the turn at a very low frequency, probably about 15-20% of the time. I'm checking range on this particular mono texture. I don't want to go too deep into what I'm actually doing, but yeah, I don't want to go too deep into what I'm doing. I roll a 2. I don't really like to just talk about RNG shit and whatnot, but yeah. River, I'm playing a strategy where I think people are front dooring too many hands, and I'm going to be bluffing some ace highs here and going very thin for value. People, if they lack check raises, we can just go very, very, very thin for value. River, we mostly want to have bigger cards, but I do need to have some overbets here. We have a pretty bad hand. We need to have some overbets to basically, obviously we want him to call when we end up having something like ace king, when we end up having something like ace queen. We want him to have some calling frequency in that particular situation. The way it's going to end up playing is he's mostly betting a bunch of like ace 10, ace 9, ace 2. He's very infrequently going to have something like, oh, queen 2 is open on the button. Like he's mostly just not going to have that many hands. When he does end up having an ace, and we end up having an ace, it's like, okay, we're going to use a massive bet here with specifically some slow played flushes, and then even probably as weak as exactly ace king. And if you want to go a little bit thinner for value against sort of like the population, you can even go something as weak as like ace queen here. Now at equilibrium, of course, he should be slow playing a bunch of flushes. On the flop, we're basically going to mix this between like, this is always going to continue, but we'll start to fold some stuff like 6s. I think against the third we continue, but yeah, this is basically going to mix between call and raise. Essentially on this ace high flop, he's not going to be putting very much money in on the turn. It's going to be a very high frequency check on the aggregate of turns, given this particular texture. So we're kind of incentivized to just like start sticking in more and more money in on the flop. Again, we want him to call down when we have a hand like jacks with the 5 of hearts with the gutter. We just need to continue, and we pretty much need to just like bet turn and shove river. He's going to call with all of his ace king, all of his other stuff, but we end up folding him off of like jacks. He folds stuff like king queen. Again, we just want to be playing a good strategy. This spot might look scary, but we just don't have very many bluffs, unfortunately, and we kind of just have to shove here. And I'm going to be shoving pretty frequently with this particular combo. And he should be calling a bunch of ace king, a bunch of ace queen. Well played to him, but yeah, I mean, in general, you need to be playing very, very strong strategies in these spots. Now, this texture, people might end up playing like not aggressively enough on the ace jack 2, but essentially the way this spot works. Now, we end up having a bunch of the ace-jack. He obviously has a bunch of the ace-jack as well. But again, and if you assume that your opponent maybe bets slightly larger with something like ace-jack or jacks on the flop as well, that might influence how you want to use your mixes, because maybe you think, like, well played. Obviously, that's a mixed strategy call. He's mostly supposed to be calling that, so, like, very well played by him. I am going to mix the ace-jack between call and 3-bet. And I roll a 94. I'm going with the check back. So here we might be inclined to be like bluffing something like a6, given that we're beating some of those. That's completely fine logic. One thing is that with this particular combo, we block more of his 10x and we block more of his king x here. So I think blocking more of his continues rather than folding him off of better ace highs is like more relevant. So yeah, I think like when we have something like a7 and we decide to check the flop back, we're essentially folding him off of something like pocket sevens. Whereas again, these blockers are just incredibly good to his continuing range. So that's how I'm going to prioritize my bets. Yeah, I mean, very well played by the guy that elected to call down the ace-queen correctly so pretty often. So again, what I was saying though is it's a texture that basically like people play too passively on the where we had the fives, especially from people that like continuation bet range. We end up playing relatively aggressive raising strategies. This is a pure fold for me. The 10-7, I don't really mind either way. I can call it, I can fold it. I tend to fold with the rake, but I'm going to fold this time. Once I have more hands, once I have more information, I might decide to start doing something. I'm going to start off with a continuation bet. We have very, very, very few continuation bets in general in these four-way situations. However, MP, we have one of our worst kings. We're opening down to king 5. And it's really hard for us to find hands. And in addition to that, our range is just smashing everybody else's range. The button isn't even continuing that many deuce-x. So in theory here, we're supposed to be basically overbetting a number of like strong ace-x to be able to shove the river. He has a bunch of ace-x himself, obviously. I'm going to be mixing the turn. The king doesn't really affect things too often. With this particular combo, I'm going with the check though, because obviously I just have too much EV against exactly 3s to 10s, but he should have a whole bunch of the ace-x as well. And we'd rather have some sort of blockers to other parts of his range. I mean, he needs to be mostly betting that, and the reason why he's electing the check is because he's a pussy. Essentially, he will rationalize to himself, well, we don't have enough bluffs. Well, the thing is, if you don't have enough bluffs in this particular situation, well, then you should find some. If you're calling the flop with something like pocket 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, like, see, he's not getting value with his range. And while I understand that he's scared of ace-king and at equilibrium, yes, he should find some frequency of check with this particular combo. That's absolutely true. I completely get that. We can mix 4-bet and call with this. Basically, just people are pussies, and like they're not going to decide to bluff 6s here. And you don't even need to use a big sizing because you have so few bluffs. In addition to that, you're kind of like trying to force the in-position player to find some frequency of call, obviously. I think he's just worried that when he bets, he's going to get raised or something like that, and blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, obviously just bluff catch correctly, or maybe you want to make some sort of an overfold exploitatively, like whatever the case is. This turn we have to fold with our ace-jack. Just have to fold this. On the ace-4-4, while his range is like a little bit more concentrated, like our opening range is basically just all these random ace-10 to ace-king off, and then the ace-king to ace-2 suited, and the majority of his range is going to, and while we basically don't have any bluffs barring exactly the Broadway region, so we're going to have to dig quite deep in this particular situation to find enough bluffs. Obviously, our hand just checks down really well against the 6s to 9s, which he's going to underbluff. He should be bluffing a bunch of 6s to 9s on the river. In addition to that, he should be value betting a number of like ace-jack stuff, but now he's probably not doing that. This hand basically just wants to be betting on the 3. He doesn't have so many 3s. Against 2.5x, he has a few more of the king 3 and the queen 3, and also he has like some of the stuff like 7-3, 10-3, jack 3, 9-3 that we won't be opening out of the small blind, so he does have a 3x advantage, to be clear. So on a number of pairing cards, you might see me use an overbet, you might see me use like 90%. On this particular card, because of 3x advantage, we don't really get to use massive sizes, we kind of have to scale down. Just 67 is perfectly fine in that spot. I'm gonna pause the video. I think the YouTube algorithm works better with slightly shorter videos against a recreational player who's just literally gonna have fucking anything here, and a regular who's just not checking very many good hands on the flop. I'm calling, obviously. We'll see what happens. The threes, I'm folding UTG 100%. You could open it if you want, but it's very, very easy to fold and then play more hands per hour with something that's so marginal to begin with. Poker Pro 2.0 is he's a very strong player, very, very strong player. At one point, probably top 100 no limit players in the world, potentially better. I just don't know him that well. Maybe you'd say top 50 in the world. Very strong poker player. Not sure what he's doing at 100 NL at the moment, but I've played a bit with him, and he's always just crushing my soul, no matter what the situation is. It's fun to play against some of these guys. Oh man, we've gone 25 minutes, which is much longer than I wanted to go. I wanted to go about 15 minutes, not more than 15 minutes, but we've got a little bit of extra juice in there. We're getting a whole bunch of free play. Let's get it in. Let's get it in. Oh, fuck. This thing wasn't even... I'm just going to sit out next hand. We're going to sit out next hand so we can get through this. There we go. So thanks, everybody, for watching. This is Omis Hot 22 for PokerCoachShow.com, and peace out.